One of the most critically reviled games in the entire Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil 6 is one of the wildest, strangest, most over-the-top video game experiences of all time. It's the result of an attempt to cram every conceivable thing that Resident Evil is known for, all into a single game. There's exploring fancy buildings, a zombie outbreak in small-town America, Nemesis, doomed special forces guys, tombs of the blind dead, secret Umbrella Labs, giant transforming bosses, inventory management, zombie dogs, government conspiracies, an evil corporation, Albert Wesker's son, Sherry escaping through sewers, cave trolls, and, of course, Ada Wong. The game is absolutely bursting with ideas, mechanics, set pieces. The action in this game is so preposterously huge, it's almost as if the cinematic producers had become annoyed at Paul Anderson cribbing all of their best work, and decided to fill the game with action sequences so over-the-top and ambitious that they'd be impossible to recreate in a movie unless the director had $500 million to play with. The longest Resident Evil game by any measure, each of the game's 4 campaigns' 5 missions are over an hour long, transforming Resident Evil 6 into horror's epic saga. In an inspired move by the developers, each of the first 3 campaigns focuses on a different set of mechanics, so that they feel like completely different experiences. The Jake and Sherry campaign focuses on the game's new melee and CQC system. The 2 leads come armed with the best melee weapons in the game, Sherry's cattle prod and Jake's zombi foo. The levels are built around offering alternate routes to approach each enemy, so the players will have the chance to run up and start punching and kicking foes without taking too many hits along the way. The Chris and Piers campaign is built around gunfighting, so the developers focus on big, largely open maps so that players will have good sightlines to shoot the various mutants and criminals they're up against. The Leon and Helena mission is classic Resident Evil. Narrow hallways, weaker weapons early on, zombies everywhere. The only one of the main 3 campaigns to offer any zombies, actually. Then Ada comes in for the final campaign that perfectly blends all 3 gameplay styles, letting the player use all of the skills they'd spent the past 15 hours learning. It has one of the most brilliantly constructed game flows I've ever encountered. Resident Evil 6 doubled down on Resident Evil 5's co-op focus by adding a host of multiplayer options. Not only is every campaign but Ada's playable co-op, there's a multiplayer version of Mercenaries to play with, featuring a wide variety of alternate costumes and weapon loadouts. Agent Hunt mode, where the player can drop into someone else's campaign as a monster to make their experience more challenging, and the crossover sequences. Set-piece battles allowing 2 sets of co-op partners playing different campaigns to team up with one another. This mode was a refreshing addition, and when the game was first released, I was delighted to find that every time I got into one of the fight sequences, the game quickly snagged me some co-op partners to make quick work of the opposition. It's legitimately impressive how much exclusive content there is for each campaign. All 3 have their own exclusive monsters, locations, and weapons, reinforcing the feel that these are essentially 3 completely different stories that are being experienced in sequence. While there are some reused areas, each campaign is mostly made up of unique maps. The only exception is Ada's campaign, which, other than an incredible opening sequence set on a gigantic submarine, is about what Ada was doing in all of the locations while the other campaigns were happening. So it's understandable that there would be a lot of reused assets and scenarios. With fantastic action, a huge amount of content, some of the series' best boss fights, and online options that are unparalleled even by today's standards. Why was Resident Evil 6 so hated at the time of its release, and still thought of as a series low point today? This isn't a rhetorical question. There is an answer. Quite a simple one, actually. Capcom screwed up the main menu. Really. That's it. When someone starts the game for the first time, the first thing they'll do is play a tutorial prologue, following Leon through the ruined streets of Lianshan, China, killing zombies and learning the game's new mechanics. After completing the tutorial, the players will be asked which campaign they want to start playing via this menu. You're looking at Capcom's big mistake, the one that ensured that the game would be critically torn apart. All of the game's reception issues owe their origins to this menu, and Capcom's decision to list the campaigns with Leon first, Chris second, and Jake third. The problem? That's the exact opposite order in which the game should be played. Everything about the game's story and gameplay is meant to gradually escalate over the course of the campaigns. starting with the relatively small-scale fistfights of the Jake campaign, to the high-tension gunfights of the Chris campaign, all the way to the full-on zombie apocalypse of the Leon campaign. No one, not the critics who got it in advance, not all the people who bought it, turning it into the most financially successful Resident Evil game of all time, can be blamed for making this mistake. The fact that they just started the game as Leon, combined with the fact that Leon's campaign is listed first, creates a clear implication that players are supposed to continue playing as Leon, and that implication destroys the experience of playing the game. I'm sure that had I made the same mistake everyone else did, I'd have a very different feeling about the game. I really lucked out in that when I got finished with the prologue, I assumed that because the game's flash-forward prologue had started with Leon, that the game should then end with Leon. So I selected Jake, seeing as his campaign was the furthest away from Leon's. This proved incredibly fortuitous, as I was able to enjoy the game's story as intended, rather than have my experience ruined by Capcom's terrible mistake. The mistake really does sabotage the game in every conceivable way, making it seem far worse than it actually is. Resident Evil 6 is arranged with a constant escalation in mind, and playing it in the suggested order reverses that flow, creating a game that gets less interesting the longer one plays it. Not only that, it sabotages the effectiveness of every plot reveal that the game has, muting their impact, preventing the player from getting involved in the story at all. Take, for example, the story of Carla Radam and the two Ada Wongs. Here's the arc that's supposed to happen over the length of the game. First, she appears in Jake's campaign, teasing players with the idea that Ada is evil now. Then in Chris's campaign, she appears as the main antagonist, using the fact that Ada's known to Chris in order to get close to him, then murdering his entire team. Then he spends most of the campaign chasing her through Lianshan, finally killing her on an aircraft carrier. Chris also spots a second Ada running around, creating confusion and revealing that something strange is going on. Then, in Leon's campaign, we get the reveal of what happened. Simmons, who is sexually obsessed with Ada, infected Carla with an engineered version of the C virus, so that her body would transform into Ada's, while leaving her mind essentially intact. Now think about what it was like for everyone who played the game in Capcom's suggested order. The player starts the game by finding out that there's an Ada clone out there, but doesn't interact with her in the Leon chapter very much. When Chris runs into the fake Ada, they'll immediately know it's Carla and not be surprised. When Jake and Sherry meet her, it's just a brief cameo by a character we've already seen die. Instead of a mystery being presented and clues piling up until we reveal what happened, a solution is presented to a mystery we don't even know exists, making all of the clues feel redundant as we happen across them. It's the same thing with Derek Simmons, the game's main villain. In Jake's campaign, he's Sherry's boss, and her main goal is to get Jake to him, so they can produce a cure for the C virus by using the immunity in his blood. So it's something of a surprise when, halfway through the game, Simmons appears and turns out to be the bad guy behind the C virus in the first place. Then in the Chris campaign, players learn about Simmons' plan, and in Leon's campaign, players find out all about his backstory before having a final showdown with him. If players do the campaigns in the suggested order, then they'll have killed the game's main boss by the 5-hour mark, and by the time they get to Jake, Simmons' reveal won't have any impact because he was established as a villain 12 hours earlier. Setting the story aside for a moment, even the gameplay is massively harmed by playing Resident Evil in the wrong order. The game's boss fights are designed to escalate over the course of the game. Jake's main foe is Ustanak, who is essentially the game's nemesis. Players spend a good chunk of the game being chased by him, but fundamentally, he's just a tyrant with some neat arm attachments. His boss fight, while well designed, isn't particularly impressive. It's just a fist fight with him while suspended over some lava. Then Chris's boss increases the stakes. It's a giant mutant monstrosity with electro powers, who trashes the entire base while trying to get to Chris and Piers. It's so formidable that Piers has to sacrifice himself and get his own mutant electro powers in order to stop it. Finally, we have Simmons, the star of a multi-stage boss fight that's one of the most impressive things the series has ever offered. Simmons himself is a masterpiece of art design, with a body that extends into sections, then transforms into a series of bizarre threats. First, he becomes a centaur with a flesh Gatling gun that fires bone fragments during a chase atop a subway car. Then he becomes a T-Rex and chases players around the lobby of the Umbrella Building. finally he transforms into an enormous housefly for the grand finale, in which players have to murder him with lightning. This is obviously supposed to be the final boss encounter of the game. Heck, the game's menus are all themed around compound eyes, because they represent Simmons' final boss form. This is unquestionably meant to be the climax of the game. Yet Capcom's mistake ensures that players are encouraged to spoil the ending just a couple of hours into their full playthrough. Consider what this was like for people playing the game in Capcom's suggested order. Their boss fight experience will start with an hour-long, multi-stage battle against one of the most impressive bosses in the entire franchise. Then they'll be up against a smaller, less terrifying boss in the second campaign, before finally having a fistfight with a tyrant. Playing the game in the proper order is like slowly increasing the air in a balloon until it explodes with the drama of Simmons' perfectly framed death scene. Playing the game in Capcom's suggested order is the equivalent of slowly letting the air out of that same balloon until there's nothing left but a floppy rubber husk. Another perfect example is the set-piece action the game features. These get gradually more and more impressive over the course of the game. Jake has a helicopter chase, a snowmobile chase, and a motorcycle chase. Chris amps things up with a jeep chase through a city, followed by a sequence where he flies an attack jet. Then the Leon campaign has a kart chase, a water slide, a jetliner crash, a boss fight on a moving train, a chase across an exploding freeway full of cars, and a scene where they get chased by a T-Rex while driving a jeep. In the Capcom order, action scenes start out incredible and then get smaller and smaller scale, guaranteeing that people will be underwhelmed by Jake's set pieces, which, while thrilling, pale in comparison to what Leon gets up to. The game's not perfect by any means. The cover system is clunky, the skills system is needlessly complicated, and the game's tutorial doesn't sufficiently explain how to use the CQC system. Despite those flaws, however, it's still an incredible game, hampered only by a main menu which ensures players will see it in the worst possible light. So, why would Capcom make this huge mistake? It's obvious that everyone working on the game knew the correct order. Everything about the story and gameplay is tuned to be played Jake, Chris, Leon. So why let players pick the order at all? Why not force them to play it in Jake, Chris, Leon order, unlocking the campaigns for replay as they go? I don't know the actual reason, but I do have one suspicion. I think it might have been arranged that way to protect the multiplayer experience for people playing it around launch, specifically the crossover events I mentioned earlier. That might sound crazy, but consider this. Capcom assumed a huge number of people were going to buy and play the game right at launch, and that's exactly what happened. Millions of people playing it at the same time, moving through the campaign at roughly the same pace. Here's the problem. If everyone was playing the same campaign at the same time, there would be no one playing the other campaigns to jump in during the crossover events. In the second week, as people move on to the other campaigns and new people start playing the game, there would have been plenty of players. But in that first week, during launch, the most excited and invested fans wouldn't have gotten a chance to play with the crossover feature at all in their first trip through the game. So maybe a compromise got made that wound up destroying the entire experience for a huge number of players. Enough so the game is remembered as a failure when it's really one of the series' high points. Honestly, do you think that the game would have started with the President Zombie getting shot in the head if players weren't already supposed to know that the president was dead? That would be insane. So if you've never played Resident Evil 6, sorry for ruining the entire story for you, but I'm still going to suggest you play the game. It's amazing. And if you played it in the past and didn't like it, consider going back and trying it in the correct order. I think you'll find it's a much better experience than you remember it being. I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you haven't yet, be sure to like and subscribe. If there's a topic you'd like to see covered in a future video, just mention in the comments section. I'll see you back here for the next thing, but until then, au revoir.